If you've worked on a software development and testing team, you've probably wrangled with poor customer requirements, slipping schedules, inability to reuse test cases from release to release, and you've probably lost track of key defects at some point that needed to get resolved for a particular release. If you have, we can help. With ALMComplete, you can organize requirements into releases or agile sprints so that you always know what's shipping in a particular release. You can also track any enhancement requests as a product backlog, allowing you to prioritize all of the items for an upcoming release. You can tame your requirements by using our wizard to develop a project plan from them. Once created, you can decompose those tasks into something more granular, allowing individual tasks to have estimates, and you can assign those to various people on your team. You can even set predecessor relationships so that certain tasks follow on to others. As people log their time towards this, the actuals are updated as well as the percentage complete. If you ever run into a scenario where you've over-allocated a person, you'll notice a red exclamation point appears next to their name, allowing you to go into a resource availability report. Once this is launched, it shows you day by day what this person's working on. If you have any days that are overloaded, they turn red. You can then drill into that information to determine exactly what you did to over-allocate them. If you ever need to know how your release is progressing, inspect your dashboards to see a burn down rate, resource availability, and also slipping tasks. Slipping tasks will identify any task that should be 100% done by today, but for whatever reason they're not. If you click on the graph, it'll show you the details that make that up. You can also tie test cases back to requirements to get great traceability. At any time, you can see how many test cases you've written for each requirement and the number of defects discovered. Notice here for this Add New Order screen, we have 19 test cases. If I drill into that, it'll show me exactly what sprint and what release they were run in and what the current status is. The same goes for defects. I can see that this particular requirement has 5 open defects. Reusing test cases from release to release is a breeze. Simply organize them by functional area and drag and drop them into a release folder so that you can determine which ones you're going to run in a specific release. You'll also notice that any test cases that have failed turn red. Any of the test cases that have passed turn green. You can filter for just the ones that are still awaiting run, and you can drill into that to begin the run process. If you do need to fail a test case, you can mark it as failed and automatically generate a defect by simply clicking the Automatically Generate Defect checkbox. Once that's done, it'll create a defect on your behalf. Then you can set this up to be fixed in a particular release and assign it to someone on your team. As soon as you submit it, it'll then route that particular defect to that engineer and allow them to begin working on it. Then you can go back to your testing process. Your team will appreciate the ability to see your test runs graphically. Day by day, you can see how many test cases have passed, how many have failed, and how many are still awaiting run. You can also look at more details about the test cases. You can see what your test cases are and who they're assigned to. You can also drill into that information at any time to see more of the detail. As we saw earlier, you can also track any defects that arrive during the QA process. Notice from our grouping area, we can show all of the defects by status, and then we can drill in by individual engineer. Similar to the test cases area, you can also see dashboards for the defects, so you can trend out the number of defects discovered day by day. You can quickly see how many are open and how many have been resolved. You can also scroll down and look at defects by severity, allowing you to very quickly see which ones are more problematic. You can also see them by priority. This allows you to identify any of the defects that are prioritized too high so that you can limit the number of defects that you work on at any given time. ALMComplete ships with a number of reports to allow you to keep everybody in the loop. Notice that we have a plethora here of defect reports. You can also see a number of project management reports. We have plenty of requirement reports as well. We also show test case reports as well as timesheet reports. So what do these reports look like? Well, let's go into the test cases area and we'll run a test case to requirement traceability report to see exactly what test cases were created for each requirement and what defects have been discovered. Once this report appears, you can see every requirement that you have listed for each release in each sprint. Within the requirement, you can see all of the test cases that have run and the current status of those. If you identified any defects during your testing, those defects will be clearly illuminated here as well. Now that you've seen a tour of ALMComplete, let's step through putting a set of requirements under Project Management. We'll get started by going to our product backlog in the requirements area. We'll then choose a couple of requirements that we want to do in this upcoming sprint, which will be Sprint 2. Let's imagine that we decided that we wanted these 2 high priority items to be done. We would simply press the Fast Edit button. We would tell it to move these items, and we're going to move those into the second sprint of Release 1. Once we've moved them, we'll see that they'll now be in that sprint and ready to be worked on. The next step would be to go over into the project management area and to create a project plan for this second sprint. So what we'll do is we'll press Add New Plan, and then we'll put in Release 1 Sprint 2. We'll then choose our Scrum Master or Project Manager. If we want to lock in the burn down start and end dates, we can enter those there, or if we would prefer to have the individual tasks fill out the project plan, we can use the auto adjust burn down. Next, we'll use the project plan wizard to bring the requirements from the requirements area onto the project plan. Once we press continue, it'll ask us what we'd like to place on the plan. We would like to place all of the requirements from Sprint 2 onto the plan. We'll choose that, we'll press next page, and it will build the plan for us. So at this point, we can see that it's built a plan with 2 requirements, and it's linked back to the requirement at this time. At this point, we can begin decomposing these particular requirements into individual tasks. For example, if we're working on a send email feature, we may want to break this down into more distinct tasks. We can easily do that by indenting them underneath there. So let's go ahead and create a task here for maybe setting up the IMAPI email system. We'll have another task here that will be creating the email send feature. And then finally, we're going to have some unit testing. In these, we can also estimate these. I can say, well, setting up this IMAPI system is going to take 8 hours. Creating this send email screen is going to be 32 hours, and unit testing is going to be another 16. I can also move over and begin to assign these to various people. Let's assign all 3 of these over to Steve. Next, I can go in and add some additional tasks for this client listing report. I'll do that now. Once that's been entered, I'll press save, and it'll now save this plan for me. It'll also recalculate the burn down starts and the burn down ends because we asked it to automatically calculate that. One of the things you'll notice is it has over-allocated Steve with work. The reason for that is we've given Steve these 3 tasks to work on the same day. If we'd like to spread his load out, we can go ahead and use the predecessors to do that. Once we choose that and press save, it'll now recalculate his load. Once saved, notice that Steve is now allocated perfectly and he can begin work. Once all the tasks have been created for each one of the requirements and all of the tasks have been assigned to the appropriate people, the QA team can then jump in and begin creating test cases for each one of these requirements. I'll go into the send email feature and see if any test cases have been created. If I scroll down to the bottom, I can see we've already created 2 test cases. But let's imagine we wanted to create another test case. We can very simply do that by pressing New Test Case. Now notice when we're in test case mode, it'll automatically link this particular test case back to the requirement because we're creating it from there. So I'm going to go ahead and enter in some information for this test case. For this test case, we're going to test the bounce back feature. So we're going to test the email with a bounce back. We'll go ahead and fill in some other information on the test case while we're at it. Okay, we've entered some additional information here. We told it to log into the order system, right-click on the client order and choose Send Email. Then we change the email to one that we know is invalid, and then we send the email. Next, the expected result is that it should send us a bouncing email. Now the next thing we want to do is we want to place this particular test case in the library. We're going to place it in the order maintenance library. Once done, we'll press submit, and then this will take us back over into the requirement where we can see that we now have 3 test cases for this specific requirement. Now let's play the role of the tester. let's imagine that we wanted to set up test cases to run in this particular sprint, which happens to be Sprint 2. So what we'd like to do is go to our library and copy all of our reusable test cases from the library into this particular sprint. To do that, we'll press the Fast Edit button and we'll choose to copy from one folder to the other. Then we'll navigate our folder tree here and go to Sprint 2. We'll highlight all of the test cases that we'd like to run in Sprint 2 and simply drag and drop those into Sprint 2 for running. Now what we can see is that we have 30 test cases slated to be run in this sprint. To begin running them, we simply go into Run Mode. We'll go through the steps here and look at the expected result. If everything works fine, we'll mark this as passed and we'll move on to the next test in the series. But let's imagine we get to this particular test case and it fails. We'd want to record here in the actual results what happened, maybe the quantity, allowed non-numerics, and it would also be nice to be able to create a defect at this time. Well, we can very easily do that by selecting Automatically Generate Defect upon Failed Test Case. Then we'll press Submit and it'll automatically create a defect for us. We can then drill into that defect, we can set it up to be fixed in the sprint, and then we can assign it to someone. Now notice that it's already filled in the steps to reproduce, expected results, and actual results, and it automatically tied this back to the test case as well. That gives us full traceability. I'll press Submit and it takes us right back into test mode. Now as you begin your testing, you can also go to the dashboard and you can see day by day how many test cases have passed, how many have failed, and how many are still awaiting run. Now let's also consider that you're an automation whiz and you've used ALMComplete in the past to create your automated test cases, or maybe you've even used Hewlett-Packard's Quick Test Pro. You can use either one of those tools and allow any runs that you have in those tools to be reported into Software Planner. I'll show you an example. Here's ALMComplete, and in ALMComplete we've automated a number of different test cases. In fact, if I go into our full regression set here, I can see that we have a number of different test cases. Now I can run a full regression here at one time, or I could run a full smoke test, or I could run a specific test case if I desire. As I run this, it'll invoke the system that's under test, and then it'll begin running that automated test. As you can see, it's bringing up my orders application and it's running through this automated test. My hands aren't on the keyboard, it's doing this all automatically. Now as soon as that test runs, it'll tell us whether that test passed or whether it failed. But more importantly, for each step of the test that it did, it'll show us a log here, and it'll show us screenshots of what was expected and what happened. And as we go through every single step, it'll show us that information. Now as it does that, it will send that log result back over in the Software Planner, and then you can go to the Automation Runs area, and day by day you can see every automated test you've run, how long it took those to run, and you can see what machine they were run on. You can also go back over to the dashboard and analyze your automated test runs right next to your manual test runs. That gives you the complete picture of testing. As you probably already noticed, you can also organize your defects that are found by sprint or by release. You can also group this information by status and by person. That way you can really find out who's assigned to what. These groupings are very flexible and you can group them any way you wish. One of the other things that you may want to consider is actually creating escalation rules. Escalation rules are under the setup area. Let's imagine that you wanted to be notified anytime a defect became stale. In other words, let's say that a defect hadn't been worked on in a while and you wanted something to happen whenever the system figured that out. Well, you can go to the System Configuration area, Escalation Rules, and then the Defects node. From here, you can add a new rule. As you add a rule, you can base it on a status. So this says anytime we find that we've got defects out there that have been active for 2 weeks, we want something to happen. We also want to make sure that it doesn't escalate more than 3 times, so we're entering that value here as well. When that particular event happens, it can then do something. And that something can be to send an email. In fact, we're showing that we're going to send an email to the assignee and the owner letting them know that these defects are getting stale. We can also escalate this item. For example, we could reassign it, or we could set the priority to a higher priority. Once we press finish, that'll run in the background, and anytime that a defect is found to be stale, it'll automatically take those actions. Well, we've shown you a lot about ALMComplete today. If you haven't yet signed up for your free 30-day trial of ALMComplete, why not do it now? I'll route you out to the sign-up page so that you can get started. Thank you.